This is Ken Willman, and I'm a graduate student in the Advanced Inquiry program within Miami University. My master plan focuses on community engagement for conservation issues that exist within my local community. Following my presentation at a recent World Community Conference, I was asked to capture one of my past projects and the steps that I follow in developing these projects. This presentation shares these steps in a project that I completed on curbside recycling within my community of Fairfield, Ohio. The first thing that I do in my planning is to get out of my house with pen and paper in hand, ask questions about what I see, and write them all down. I go to a local park or garden, grocery store or shopping mall, community center or library, or just walk down the streets of my neighborhood. This is the brainstorming phase, and I write down whatever questions come to mind at any of these locations. As an example, one evening I was walking in my neighborhood the night before trash collection, so all of the trash cans and recycling bins were out for the next morning. In my city, curbside recycling and recycling bins are included at no extra cost to the homeowner, as these are paid within our regular garbage collection bill. I noticed that some homes had out recycling bins while others did not. It made me wonder how many people in my community participate in curbside recycling. This then led into the first comparative question that I submitted for the course. Do households in different neighborhoods of my city participate to a different extent in curbside recycling? This was a good starting point for me, since I was now going to focus on curbside recycling, and allowed me to enter an initial comparative question for my project. I then researched my question by doing both a small-scale study in my community and also by reviewing the technical literature. For my recycling project, I drove around different neighborhoods within the city and created a map of how the different neighborhoods varied in their recycling efforts. Overall, I learned that about half of the residents in the city had recycling bins out with their trash for the next morning's collection. Since curbside recycling is free and so convenient in the city, I wondered why don't more people participate. What I learned from the technical literature is that everyone considers recycling as important, whether they are recyclers or not, so communication about the benefits of recycling, or guilt for not recycling, are really not very helpful in encouraging people to recycle. What is typically missing for people is specific knowledge about their local program. What can be recycled or not? Do things need separated? How do I get recycling bins? These are all confusing, and people don't typically look for that information themselves. I read that the most effective means for encouraging recycling is via personal delivery of information about how to recycle and subtle peer pressure by sharing how other residents in the community participate in the local recycling effort. This gave me the idea of going door to door with specific literature about the Fairfield recycling program to see if that would increase the number of people using curbside recycling. Before I could do this, however, I needed to get permission from someone within the city to hand out the literature. I've always found community leaders to be helpful and very interested in my studies because they're usually topics they are interested in but don't have the time or resources to study. It's critical, however, that I start to engage these people as soon as possible. They have other work to do, and their timing may not always be in sync with my timing that I required to submit papers for my classes. For my recycling project, it took several phone calls to find the person who could give me permission, who was the city's Director of Public Works, and then 2 weeks to get a meeting with him. Once I had the meeting, I learned that Fairfield had just started a new initiative to replace their 18-gallon red recycling bins with 65-gallon recycling carts, with the hope to encourage more quantities of recycled material. All the residents needed to do was call the phone number on the literature, request the new 65-gallon cart, and one would be delivered to their house within a week. This information shown on this slide had been included within the monthly water bill sent to residents and on the city web page, but the adoption rate had been slow. I was able to get permission to go door to door, but the only literature that I was allowed to hand out was this city flyer. So that created my final comparative question, which now had a very strong action component. Would a door-to-door delivery of the city literature improve adoption of the new recycling initiative in one neighborhood versus a neighborhood that did not have the door-to-door delivery and relied on the way the city was currently distributing the information. After all this planning, conducting the study became pretty straightforward. I selected 2 different neighborhoods within my city and did a baseline study by counting the total number of recycling bins and the number of 65-gallon bins present in these neighborhoods during the morning of trash collection. I did this for 2 weeks with the results shown on this slide. Both neighborhoods had a similar number of recycling bins, and only 2 houses were using the new 65-gallon carts. After these 2 weeks, I went door to door to the test neighborhood and handed out the literature from the city, either talking individually with the residents if they answered the door or leaving the literature wedged in the door if they did not answer. I then counted the number and type of recycling bins over the next 4 weeks. I found that door-to-door distribution of literature didn't increase the total numbers of households recycling, but it did lead to a dramatic increase in the number of recyclers who had obtained and were now using the new 65-gallon carts. Almost half of those recyclers in the test neighborhood were using the new 65-gallon carts after 4 weeks, while less than 5% were using the new carts in the control neighborhood that had only gotten their literature through city sources. With these results, I wrote my report for the class, but also shared it with the city public works director. He then shared the report with the city manager and with the recycling company that manages our recycling bin collection. With these results, I also shared suggestions on how the recycling information can be effectively delivered within the community at meetings, school events, or door-to-door perhaps by local scouts. I also shared suggestions on how to improve the recycling message within the community, which was based on the technical literature that I had read but city leaders were not familiar with. In finishing, this slide just shows the steps that I've described for this study, but they're the same steps I've used in all of my community engagement projects. We usually get asked to provide our initial comparative question quite early in our classes, and while I've always done this by my I wonder why questions that I generate when I wander around outside of my home, the questions do tend to evolve and their focus sharpens as I get more into my projects. I'm sure that you'll create your own process for developing these projects, but I hope you find the steps that I follow helpful as you start your next community engagement project.